What's going on, folks? Ted from Nerd Immersion here, and I apologize for casual wizard vibes today, but hey, at least we're still in the wizard situation. So, I had made a video a little while back talking about how I felt like wizards didn't have any unique cantrip all their own, and it had very mixed reviews, a lot more than I thought it would. A little bit less after I made the video kind of breaking down the spell lists and things, but either way. So I had said, hey, if you have any ideas for like a wizard cantrip, throw one out there, and maybe we'll talk about it in a video. And I have one that I designed, and I thought we would talk about that as well. And one person submitted like a nice in a stat block, spelled it all out for me, and it definitely was the most common sentiment. There were two things that I saw the most in the comments and suggestions. Some were fully kind of spelled out in spell form. Other ones were just kind of like maybe something like this. And that was Magic Missile and Shield. Lesser versions of Magic Missile and lesser versions of Shield. Which I also find interesting because other classes have access to Shield and Magic Missile, Sorcerer being one of them. But so many people consider Wizard's identity to be seemingly around those two spells, which I do just as a general thought experiment find interesting. So I'm not really sure what a lesser version of shield would look like. Some people suggested like, oh, it's just a shield, but it's a +2 to your AC. And I think the reason they suggested that is because so many martial characters have access to like a physical shield, which gives you a +2 to AC. So this would be like an always-on +2 to your AC that you could just pop. You still have to use your reaction, which is kind of the offset of it. You're using a reaction to get equivalency of +2 to your AC. But the nature of it being a cantrip is that it's unlimited, which means that it is kind of basically like giving the wizard access to the shield proficiency. Again, for usage of a reaction, where other classes it's kind of like it's just passive, but either way. So I'm not really sure that that's the way to go, but I do like the concept of a defensive cantrip. We do have a couple out there, right? Blade Ward, Resistance, and so on. But I'd like the idea of it. I just don't know if like lesser version of the shield spell is the way to go. The other one, again, as mentioned, was some form of a lesser version of Magic Missile. Almost every suggestion I saw was either cut it down to 1d4 or 2d4 and have it be an attack roll, and then the scaling increase the dice on the scaling size, usually by 2d4, to kind of balance ourselves out and get us closer to the damage output of something like a Firebolt or otherwise. I like the concept of potentially like a lesser version of an arcane, like a magic missile that is you don't have to attack, because almost all the ones I saw were in favor of you doing an attack roll, and then if it hits, it does force damage. I think it would be cool to have like, a magic missile, arcane dart, whatever, like a lesser version that just always happens and always hits, but it's only 1d4. The only problem is that doesn't scale well, right? Because you can't increase the number of dice, because then you're basically encroaching in on magic missile territory. Well, let me show you one of the ones that was submitted that kind of falls into the very sentiment that I'm talking about here. As you can see here, this one was done up nice in like a little stat block format, and if a lot of you end up submitting more after this video, maybe we'll do a follow-up. But this one, as you can see here, is called Arcane Bolt. Range of 120 feet. You make a ranged spell attack against a creature, and on a hit, it takes 2d4 force damage. The other kind of unique thing about this one is that it scales by 2d4 each subsequent level. So again, it's 4d4 at 5, 6d4 at 11, and 8d4 at 17. Now, at first, you might say, whoa, 8d4, that's a lot. But realistically, you're probably going to fall. If you look at Firebolt, right, that's 4d10. At 17, the floor of the damage on this Arcane Bolt cantrip will be higher because you're rolling 8 dice, so your minimum die roll you can make is 8 if you roll all ones. But technically, a Firebolt can out-damage Arcane Bolt if you happen to roll max damage on both. We're talking 32 versus 40. Now, the math nerds out there can kind of figure out exactly how to do this and figure out what the average damage is for all of these things. But I don't think this is bad by any means. It is kind of a lesser version, again, of a magic missile. And this one does require an attack roll, which, like I said, is fine. I just think it would be interesting if we could find a way to balance one that you didn't have to attack, but the damage would have to be in such a way that it didn't encroach on being a first-level spell. which is part of what I want to talk about Arcane Bolt, because a lot of people forget about this spell, Jim's Magic Missile, that came to us from the Acquisitions Incorporated book, which is eerily similar to a lot of these cantrip ideas. So Jim's Magic Missile, you throw 3 hypoallergenic gluten-free magical darts of force. You make a ranged spell attack against a creature within 120 feet, and on a hit, each missile deals 2d4 damage. Now, it does throw 3 missiles, and they can hit different targets. Each one does 2d4 for each hit, and then again, the difference was if you score a critical hit, it does 5d4 damage instead of doubling, right? So normally it would be 2d4 because you would double the damage. It instead does 5d4. But if any of the attack rolls on the missile are a 1, it blows up in your face, dealing a force damage per missile to you. Again, if you roll a 1 on any one of those attack rolls, all missiles miss the target. So it had like a negative offset. But again, you're firing 3 missiles. Each missile hits and can hit an individual target and does 2d4 or 5d4 on a crit. But when you cast it out of a higher level slot, it adds additional darts. This one, as mentioned, does you fire off. It's a singular bolt. It does 2d4, so it's doing the same damage that Jim is doing, but Jim's Magic Missile could hit 3. But you'll eventually outscale damage-wise on the single dart versus whatever. I just wanted to bring this up because so many of them have a similar vibe to Jim's Magic Missile and how they work. But I don't know, do we think Arcane Bolt is maybe the way to go? Another really interesting that was one that was submitted to me here was called Arcane Adjustments. And it kind of reminds me to some degree of the new Smite spells in that this Arcane Adjustments is a spell that kind of has the similar vibes of the Modify and Create spell that we saw in the Unearthed Arcana, in that you're spending your bonus action after you cast a spell to tweak something about your existing spell, right? So it says, as a bonus action, when you take the magic action during your turn, you can make small adjustments to the spell being cast. Choose 1 benefit and 1 drawback from the table, which take effect after casting the spell. So on the benefit side, we say it increase the die size, right, from a d6 to a d8 up to a d12. Increase your spell attack bonus or spell save DC by +1. Increase the spell's AoE radius by 5 feet. Each creature affected by the spell has their AC increased or decreased by 1 until the end of their next turn. Or each creature affected by the spell has their movement speed increased or reduced by 5 feet until the end of the next turn. And then the drawback column is decrease the damage size by 1, down to a d4. Decrease your spell attack bonus or spell save DC by 1. Decrease the AoE radius by 5 feet to a minimum of 5 feet. Your AC is decreased by 1 until the end of your next turn, or your movement speed is reduced by 5 feet until the end of your next turn. It says when you reach 5th level, you can choose a different additional benefit and drawback. At 11, you can choose up to 3 benefits and drawbacks, and at 17, you can choose the same benefit or drawback option more than once. So I get kind of what they're going for, right? This could basically be, I feel like the one I'm going to take is the one that tanks my my movement speed every time, because if I'm doing my wizard thing and I'm in the back, I don't care how much movement I have if I can sling a spell from a distance. I do like this concept, and this taps into that initial thing that so many of us liked about those modify and create spells, that this is kind of giving you them, but in a more momentary fashion in the form of a cantrip. And don't forget, you're also eating your bonus action on those turns to do this. So there's action economy associated with this now. You're eating your bonus action to make an adjustment. I like it. I like the concept that you came up with the benefits and the drawbacks to kind of balance it out. But I would also bring up just the fact that, like, sorcerers have that innate sorcery ability, where as a bonus action for a minute, they can just give themselves advantage on all spell attack rolls or increase their spell save DC by 1, and there's no drawback for that. But this is infinitely more usable, as you can do this every turn in theory, as opposed to that being just a 1-minute situation that you can do twice a day. So there's a little bit more, it's how often you want to do this. So you could, in theory, do arcane adjustments every turn if you wanted to eat your bonus action every turn. So I like this. This is a different one. I had brought up the concept of having maybe a unique damaging spell and a unique kind of utility spell for wizards. I kind of like this concept, as this is, I'm not 100% sold on it, but I like the concept of what we're dealing with here as like a utility option. Again, I feel like the lesser version of shield might also fall more under utility, though I think that technically would count more as defensive. Um, but these are some, again, like I said, some of the ones that were submitted. Feel free to submit more and we'll do a follow-up video, but I wanted to show you my cantrip that I designed that I think is a pretty solid wizard cantrip, and you'll let me know what you think right here. So, we have here, I guess I should probably have done this, Arcane Flare. So this is a 60-foot radius spell. You conjure a radiant burst of arcane energy and launch it at a target within range. Make a ranged spell attack against the target. On a hit, the target takes a d8 force damage. Sticking with force damage is kind of the wizardly thing. But the unique thing about this spell is if the target is concentrating on a spell, instead of making a Constitution saving throw based on the damage result, it must make a Constitution saving throw against your spell save DC or lose concentration. And then again, the damage increases by a d8 at each of the cantrip scaling levels, up to 4d8 force damage at level 17. Now, I thought this was an interesting change because normally, obviously, again, when somebody's concentrating on a spell, it's going to require you to do enough damage to get them to drop concentration. More often than not, a lot of the times the DC for the concentration check is going to be 10, especially if the damage is kind of low. If we're talking sub 20 points of damage, we're dealing with a DC 10 concentration check. So this has a potential to be very powerful from an early level when you have this, because it's going to be equal to your spell save DC, which means even at the lowest base level, a level 1 wizard with this cantrip can potentially cause an enemy spellcaster to lose concentration on their spell, whereas, again, it could be beneficial all the way up to high levels, because even at 17th level, you're throwing maybe 32 points of force damage out there, which could be decent. That's a DC 16, right? Did I do that math right? Yeah, DC 16. But, you know, you could be dealing, your spell save DC probably by the time you're level 17 is hopefully 20 plus, or at least around 20. So you could be, it's a better off move for that. And I like this too, because I feel like this is a thing that if I'm going to put it in the game that I'm going to allow my wizards to take, I'm also going to allow my enemy wizards to take it. And this is the closest kind of thing I feel like we can get in 5th edition without truly adopting spell duel rules from earlier editions where wizards get into a spell duel and it has its own kind of sub-mechanics, which might be something we revisit in a future video about taking, I want to say it was like Complete Mage or Complete Arcane had spell duels, and it was a separate kind of sub-mechanic. We might try to port that over to 5e to see how that works. But in the meantime, I think this is a pretty good one. It kind of falls into what I like to say when we look at cantrips in the world of 5th edition. And I think the general thing is, if it does it, like, this is my personal philosophy, and you can let me know if you think I'm way off base here, is that if it does a d12 damage, which is very rare, its usually range is limited to 30 feet. If it has a range of 60 feet or so, it usually does a d8, and it has some sort of cool, unique thing that it does, right? Arcane Flare, in this instance, forces the possible failed concentration check. Ray of Frost cuts movement speed. Starry Wisp, they can't go invisible. Things like that, right? It does a d8. Well, Chill Touch was changed to now be a touch, you know, a melee kind of attack, so it's a little bit of a different story. But previously, it was a d8, and it was they can't heal till next turn. So that was kind of the concept of, like, a d8 damage is a 60-foot range and a qualifier, whereas, like, Firebolt is a d10, but it has a 120-foot range, and that's all it does. It's longer range and a little bit more damage, but it just does damage. It doesn't do anything else. And then, you know, the d6s are usually more on the DC side of things, and they have maybe something that's a little bit more impactful or, you know, persistent, right? Like Vicious Mockery providing disadvantage, or Acid Splash hitting multiple creatures. The Sword Burst Word of Radiance is kind of a miniature AoE, so you're getting more targets than you would normally do, but the damage is scaled down. Now, I could be totally off on that, but that's kind of what I've seen when I look at all the cantrips we have in 5e. Again, when we're talking attacking cantrips, I guess more than anything, right? It's the d8, and it comes with a qualifier, because technically Sacred Flame is a d8, but it doesn't have an attack roll, but it does kind of ignore up to 3/4 cover now. So I don't know. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. If you have additional ideas for wizard cantrips that you'd like to throw out there, utility or otherwise. If I get a whole bunch of them and they're, again, the ideal thing for me would be that it's put in a way that it kind of falls into this sort of like block, name, casting time, blah, blah, blah effects. And then that's just easy for me that if I don't have it in like a picture format, like something like this, where I can just grab it, I can just copy and paste this into a Google Doc and we can talk about it that way. So I would recommend, something like that. But also feel free to throw out other cantrips ideas. Maybe we'll just make your homebrew cantrip ideas. I'll take the ones I think look the best, and then we'll go ahead and make a follow-up video on it. But I am curious what other people have thoughts on like utility-based cantrips. After recent events and a campaign that I'm in, I think a reactionary means to like steal something from somebody again, or like something that's not being worn or carried. Like let's say I have a ring and the ring is sitting on the table and it's not worn or carried. Somebody puts the ring down. I think a cool like whoop, snatch spell. I think that actually is a spell. Snatch is a spell that exists, but it was more like a trip. But, something like that. That could be a fun utility spell where you just kind of, whoop, pocket grab something, because Mage Hand has to float out and grab it and bring it back to you. I don't know. Let me know your thoughts and opinions in the comments down below. I'll see you all next time.